Okay. Um, shall we start? Hello everyone. As I collect my thoughts for this talk, I collect moments from a protest, possibly many protests, a riot, I forgot which one, flu like virus, and all memories crushed in between. But the tracing brings me back to a more juvenile memory. I can trace the exact moment that I broke. The date was February 21, 2017, which was one of those chance afternoons where I overslept. Should I even go today? I grabbed a copy of my heavily highlighted shadow lines and took the yellow line from the horse to Vishyavindalaya. Standing in the crowded second coach, I faintly remember promising a friend who was a member of the Ramjas Literary Society to film a panel for cultures of protest. I'm definitely going to miss the first one. I was not interested in any kind of protest at that point, and bodies in protest at the interstices of gender and sexuality fired no synapse in my brain. Maybe Sanjay Kaak and Umar Khalid might say something about cinema rather than just talking about unveiling the state. This better be. There are some days or other moments that you float into, where your free will takes a step back as you shed skin, lead. You watch your own unfolding in third person. Rabab just remembers standing in front of the Ramjas canteen and hearing screams of his friends in a room next to him. Outside were 1,000 angry eyes, all men in white and brown, pushing, throwing, drinking. Fear is without analogy, for it is not comparable to the fear of nature, which is the most universal of human fears, nor to the fear of the violence of the state, which is the commonest of modern fear. It is a fear that comes from the knowledge that normalcy is utterly contingent, that the spaces that surround one, the streets that one inhabits, can become, suddenly and without warning, as hostile as a desert in a flash flood. It is this that sets apart the 1,000 million people who inhabit the subcontinent from the rest of the world. Not language, not food, not music. It is the special quality of loneliness that grows out of the fear of the war between oneself and one's image in the mirror. An image in the mirror. As Arbab steps out of his body, he could see himself float through an interconnected web of identities, contradicting each other, of a Muslim, of a progressive student, of a man. He chose to step away from this anger and walk out, as he felt unsafe in a space usually associated with comfort, a space where he would learn and question himself. He chose to put his camera inside and save himself from these creeping, raging eyes. This moment flung him 2 years later, when things became much worse. The government crackdown on Muslims of India had become much more totalizing. The way they dressed, the way they practiced their religion, the way they took up space. All of it was put under heavy scrutiny not only by the government but majority society at large. The camera picked him up again. They became an interface between him and the world, archiving, bringing forward an absolute rage to a sort existence. Insides and outsides was born. I feel like in my film, I'm almost performing and not really acting into this role of seeking, a kind of vision. While both the viewer and I know that there is no such thing, what I'm seeking here is more of a need to find a truth to make sense of what is happening in the country and what is happening to the Muslim mind in the process. What essentially became of interest to me then is the process of truth seeking and its effects on the self, rather than what generally conventional documentary practice would dictate as an uncovering. This film slowly, almost in retrospect, became a collection of processes for me. To flatten, for me, just like a social media feed to put in the drawer, my own lived experience to that of evidence. And look at what the process of recovering truth from multiple vantage points does to an individual.
दुनिया में आए तो हम अमर हैं, हम मरेंगे ही नहीं। आपको पता है कि आपको आईआईटी से जाना है तो उससे मूव ऑन, हाँ हमने दिया, आप फिर भी पुरानी कहानी सुनाते हो, उसका मतलब आप मूव ऑन नहीं किए।
कमाल है,
क्या बात है आपका। मेरी
एक बुढ़ापे में आदमी अगर कोई बुढ़ा आदमी अपने बचपन और जवानी की बातें सुनाए तो उसको आप कहोगे क्या कहते हैं, he hasn't moved on। अरे भाई
नहीं, वही तो
हिस्ट्री है।
नहीं, हिस्ट्री नहीं, वो वही चीज तो मेरा क्या, मेरी मेमोरी नहीं है आईआईटी के अंदर।
Ashfaq Hussain was 22 years old. He's an electrician in Mustafabad who was returning home from Brahmpuri on the evening of February 25th. Mehtab Khan, Zakir Ahmed were coming back from Maghrib prayers at the nearby Farooqiya Masjid. All three of them were lynched by mobs during the Delhi riots of February 2020. Not one of them came back home that day. Inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi raji'un. Mehboob Ali from Harewali village in Bhavana was returning from Madhya Pradesh after attending the Tablighi Jamaat Markaz conference. When he returned to his village, rumors spread that he was knowingly spreading the coronavirus. A mob then took him away and brutally thrashed him in the nearby fields. He was tested negative. A mob of 15 men entered Muhammad Akhlaq's house and got furious to find meat in the fridge, claiming it was beef. They took the bricks that kept their family bed level and beat him to death. When his 21-year-old son tried to intervene, they beat him unconscious too. The family had been living in the village for 70 years. They allegedly saw their neighbors in the mob. The meat in question was mutton. Inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi raji'un. Faizan was 23 years old when he was lying on the road, barely moving, injured and being forced to sing the national anthem during the Delhi riots. From the age of 10 to 11, Faizan worked as a tailor to support his family economically. The family had wanted Faizan to get married soon. His work was going well, so they got him engaged 2 months before his untimely death, to be married on the upcoming Eid in May 2020. They got to know Faizan's fate through a viral video. Muhammad Khalil Alam Rizvi was 34 years old who lived in a village in Musrigarari, Bihar. His body was found buried 5 feet under the ground. There was an attempt made to make the body unrecognizable. Salt was spread on him to aid attempts to burn the corpse. 2 days later, a video was released online by an accused. Apologizing for Truth seeking becomes a fantasy proposition in the times we live in. It takes a fair amount of delusion to make any emotional sense of senseless violence. Retrospectively speaking, my attempts of taking on multiple vantage points of archives, memories, news clippings, book excerpts, maps, even trying multiple eras of technologies with old and nostalgic overhead projectors, new microphones are honestly all attempts to end the grief. That if I make sense of things, I might feel less anxious on the day. My own insertion in the documentary is my way of signaling a difference of intention here. That this navigation is the story. That there is a sense of assertion in my very presence in the film. My process, as it turns towards the more personal, starts archiving the tangibly real. At this point, truth seeking becomes secondary to a positive feeling embedded in the process. Knowing well enough how tragic outcomes will seize these realities, for me, it became important to stop navigating, pause, and stay with a feeling that I know from my own heart as true.
यहाँ पे प्रोटेस्ट में कुछ लोगों के अभी भी कर रहे हैं वीडियो देख मतलब अब बचाने का कोई नहीं आएगा, आप उम्मीद करना छोड़ दो, खुद खड़ी हो अपने लिए। वो दौर आ गया, औरत को इतना पावरफुल बनाओ, चाहे वो दलित की बेटी हो चाहे सौण समाज जिसको कहते हैं आप।
तो हर चीज पॉलिटिसाइज है ना,
हर चीज तो पॉलिटिसाइज तो जरूरी भी है होना। अच्छा, अब अपना सबमिशन कब तक देना है, उसका टाइम कब तक दिया?
मुझे कोई जल्दी नहीं है, मैं बिरयानी की डॉक्यूमेंट्री बना लूँगा और क्या।
रुबीना नसीम का जन्म मानो यात्राओं के बीच ही हुआ। अपने वालिद की नौकरी के चलते रुबीना 2 साल से ज़्यादा एक जगह पर नहीं रही। उनका परिवार और लोग ही उनके जीवन की एकमात्र स्थायी चीज़ थी और अपनी परवरिश के दौरान उन्होंने इसी में अपनी ज़िंदगी के मायने तलाश कर लिए थे।
ये तो बहुत ही बुरी तस्वीर है।
वो बहुत सारी जगहों पर रही, अलग अलग तरह के लोगों के साथ।
यहाँ से कितने प्लांट ले जाने का प्लान है?
100 तो जाएंगे, उससे ज़्यादा भी हो सकती है।
अभी कितने हैं प्लांट्स?
होंगे 100, छोटे बड़े सब मिला के काफ़ी हैं।
तो सारे ले जाने?
कोशिश करूँगी, सब अगर एकोमोडेट हो जाएंगे तो ले जाऊँगी, नहीं तो कुछ किसी को दे दूँगी जो प्लांट लवर होगा। बोनसाई नहीं दूँगी मैं किसी को, जो मैंने खुद बनाया। ये वाला प्लांट नहीं दूँगी, इसको खुद बनाया है, शेप में लेके आया है, सालों से पाला है तब ये शेप आया है।
अगर खुदा ना खास्ता कुछ हो गया इन प्लांट्स को तो फिर आपका क्या रिएक्शन होगा?
बुरा लगेगा, जैसे तुम लोगों को चोट लगती है, तुम लोग तकलीफ में होते हैं, वैसे बुरा लगता है, वैसे प्लांट के लिए भी लगता है। कोई मर जाता है तो बुरा लगता है प्लांट, कोई किसी में फूल आता है तो बहुत अच्छा लगता है, किसी की ग्रोथ अच्छी होती है तो देख के खुशी होती है, मज़ा आता है।
एक औरत का इतिहास अक्सर गुम हो जाता है क्योंकि उसकी खोज नहीं की जाती, पर उसका वजूद होता है, ठीक उसी तरह जैसे उन इतिहासों का भी वजूद होता है जो एक दिन ख़त्म हो जाते हैं।
For the first time in my life, I felt that I was part of something bigger. Nosheen Khan stepped outside Jamia with her camera one fateful night. Her first entry of inquiry in her work, Land of My Dreams, was why she was the only woman in that space. She was simultaneously trying to place her own body present in a protest that was also unfolding at a breakneck pace. She was somehow able to simultaneously watch history happen and place herself within it, not at the center but part of a larger whole. There had to be a placement of the self within this larger political context because somehow this movement was not only extending out but also extending inwards, sifting through family albums and history books, giving them equal weightage.
मोदी हमारा भगवान है और अमित शाह हमारा भगवान और मोदी हमारा राम, अमित शाह हमारा कृष्ण। देश में किसको रहना है वो शांति बना के रखे। हम लोग हिंदू लोग किसी को परेशान नहीं करेंगे और अपना समाज बचाएंगे तो 100 करोड़ हिंदू तैयार हो जाएगा। हम प्यार से हैं। जय हिंद, जय भारत।
Imagine if I showed you this footage and told you that this is how all Hindus are.
हम ठोक के देंगे आजादी, हम ठोक के देंगे आजादी। अरे किसको चाहिए आजादी? ये पाकिस्तान नहीं होगा, हिंदुस्तान है। हम लोग को जाने आने में 2-2 घंटा प्रॉब्लम हो रहा है दिल्ली से नोएडा।
तो इसका पाकिस्तान से क्या लेना देना?
ये मुसलमान लोग पाकिस्तान बनाना चाहता है। लगा के लट बजाओ, हम तुम्हारे साथ हैं। मोदी जी को लट बजाओ।
The unifying factor being a singular emotion, guiding towards a semblance of truth, of rage wrapped around fear. Fear and rage, bodies stuck in the past. 2.5 hours away, Eraz Zaman was trying to piece together what happened. The aftermath of the December violence on the AMU students was noise, with thousands of mobile videos and no clear first-hand account from the students. How does one know the truth with certainty? Eraz was moved to make a film in a decent manner to set the record straight. He shot his immediate surroundings, his friends and the ones who were directly affected by violence. Purpose prevailed over everything else, as conveyed by the form of the piece. Straight to camera, consistently letting truth speak for itself through the voices of the affected. Interestingly, the way the film is structured, apart from the events in place, also is deeply emotional, enraged and closer to its subject than a conventional documentary practitioner.
गन के बट से और लातों से तो दरवाजे के अंदर का जो कड़ी था वो टूट चुका था और वो काफ़ी दरवाज़ा खुलता और बंद होता था। तो 4-5 स्टूडेंट हम दरवाजे पे खड़े हो गए और दरवाजे को खुलने से बचा रहे थे। लेकिन इसी बीच बाहर से एक पुलिस वाले ने कहा कि दरवाजे पे गोली चलाओ। तो हम काफ़ी डर गए कि दरवाजे पे अगर गोली चलती है तो सीधा हमारे सीने पे या इस पे लगेगी, और अगर हम नहीं भी खोलते हैं तो उसके करीब में खिड़की था, वो खिड़की से टियर शेल अंदर छोड़ देंगे, जिसके बाद हमें दरवाज़ा खोलना ही पड़ेगा। तो हमने दरवाज़ा छोड़ दिया। जैसे ही हमने दरवाज़ा छोड़ा तो तकरीबन 10 से 12 पुलिस वाले अंदर मतलब रूम में घुस गए। वन जब वो उन्होंने एंट्री मतलब रूम में आया तो वो काफ़ी मतलब एग्रेसिव थे और उनके इस पे लग रहा था कि उनका जो इंटेंशन था कि इन्हें पीटना है और जो भी गुस्सा था पूरे उन्हें ऐसे मिलने के निकालने का। तो आते ही उन्होंने लाठियाँ चलानी शुरू कर दी सब पे।
उसके बाद फिर उन्होंने टॉयलेट का गेट तोड़ना स्टार्ट कर दिया। हम 9 लड़कों ने उसको सपोर्ट कर रखा था तो तोड़ नहीं पाए और कहते हैं कि इसके अंदर भी हैं और यहीं पे कैंप करते हैं, यहीं पे बैठ जाओ अभी निकलेंगे। वहीं पे कैंप कर लेते हैं, बैठ जाते हैं। अब हम लोग अंदर थे, वहाँ पे अंदर वहाँ से कोई मदद का ज़रिया भी नहीं था। किसी से हेल्प लेनी चाहें तो कैसे ले सकते थे, ना ही कॉल कर सकते थे क्योंकि बाहर थे, आवाज़ सुन लेते। ग्रुप में मैंने व्हाट्सएप पे वॉइस नोट सर्कुलेट किया था, उसमें हेल्प मांगी थी।
भाई हम लोग गेस्ट हाउस नंबर 3 में फंसे हुए हैं। 10-12 लड़के हैं यहाँ पे, पुलिस लोग दरवाज़ा तोड़ रहे हैं। भाई हेल्प के लिए जल्दी से आ जाएं कोई कैसे भी।
उन्होंने फिर से गेट तोड़ना स्टार्ट किया और तोड़ते तोड़ते उन्होंने तोड़ दिया गेट। तोड़ने के बाद फिर हम लोगों को निकाला और बहुत बुरी तरीके से पीटा। मतलब एक लड़के के ऊपर 4 पुलिस वाले थे और वो टीयर गैसेस की जो गन होती हैं उसके बट से मार रहे थे। जब मेरे ऐसा लगा उनको कि बॉडी में कुछ नहीं है, मुझे भी ऐसा लगा कि कुछ बचा ही नहीं है, बहुत ज़्यादा मार दिया।
मुझे लगा कि अब जितना होने का था यहीं पे हो गया, अब हम यहाँ से जाएंगे, जेएनएम से जाएं या फिर रूम जाएं। लेकिन सडनली एक पुलिस वाले ने कहा कि इन्हें थाने ले चलो।
मुझको बिठाते हैं, फिर एक और आता है कोई, उसको जीप में बिठाया और वहाँ से निकाल देते हैं, डिटेन कर लेते हैं, ले जाते हैं थाने। फिर वहाँ पे अराउंड 30 मिनट ऐसे ही आधे घंटे के करीब वहाँ पे रखा। उसके बाद वो मेडिकल के लिए बन्ना देवी मलखान सिंह हॉस्पिटल लाते हैं।
In Sufism, there are 3 levels of certainty, by the end of which you reach oneness with God. Ilmul Yaqeen is the first degree where everything depends on your knowledge. This is what you read, watch, write. Ainul Yaqeen is the second degree of knowledge by presence. Haqqul Yaqeen is the final stage of certainty, where the moment object of certainty is identical to the one who is experiencing it. Knowledge is transformed into actual experience, and actual experience into knowledge. This is the closest to God one can be. I propose that the process of making films that wrap the personal around the public are in the process of experiential knowledge making. As we use the medium of film as an assembly point of our family's past, the political present, and the uncertain future, we collapse knowledge and experience into one. The nature of this emotional historicizing is taking into account our own place in that history, and that reflects in the form of these connected works. Cinema that is closer to God. What is the thread that connects these films together? All of them are coming in response to pressures on our identities, inflicted from outside. The majority community tramples on us both socially and politically. Our work is, simply put, born out of the need to combat this shrinkage of space. This work has some distinct characteristics. All of them have an element of rage. They aren't neutral viewpoints interested in journalistic objectivity. Every work is deeply curious in the twisting of history by the powers that be, and at the same time is not interested in correcting this history in a direct manner. Every filmmaker in this tradition is using themselves as a focal point, excavating their own family history or memory, in a desperate attempt to inscribe whatever one can. The form of the works is sourced from this space. Its rawness is the confidence that any frills here would destroy the message. Flying back to 2017, one can trace another life of a student in Ramjas. A Kashmiri Muslim student was navigating the same violence, feeling doubly scared for herself, and insurmountable amount of precarity, and that she carried with her for years to come as things got worse. Muntaha's film, A Siege in the Air, is a ballad of melodies. It positions itself at the level of the interconnected web that Kashmiri Muslims inhabit in the valley, telling many stories of yearning, loss, and hope, all of whom have no space in conventional media. This work, too, plays the dual role of being a subject unto itself, fueled by an assertive rage to exist. It repeats the image of her trying to cross a bridge over and over, a painful refrain of no escape from the horrors of the valley.
एक मेरी फेसबुक फ्रेंड है, तो उसने मुझे मैसेज किया फेसबुक पे। तो उसने एक लेटर लिखी थी अपने एक कश्मीरी दोस्त के लिए, तो कहा ये वहाँ तक पहुँचा सकते हो उनके घर तक। तो मुझे आइडिया आया और मैंने एक फ़ेसबुक पे पोस्ट डाला। उसमें मैंने लिखा कि अगर कोई भी कश्मीरी चाहता है कि उसके घर तक कोई मैसेज पहुँचे तो मुझे इनबॉक्स करे। तो काफ़ी सारी मैसेज आई, कुछ लोगों ने वॉइस नोट्स भेजे, कुछ लोगों ने टेक्स्ट भेजा, कुछ लोगों ने लेटर लिखी, उसका फिर फ़ोटो भेजा। तो इवन एक लड़का भी मिला मुझे दिल्ली में, उसने कुछ पैसे दिए, कहा कि मेरे घर तक पहुँचाना। तो पैसे नहीं जा पा रहे थे यहाँ वहाँ, तो बीइंग एज ए जर्नलिस्ट उसने मुझ पर भरोसा किया। अगले दिन वो पैसे, वो वॉइस नोट्स, वो सारी मैसेज लेके मैं कश्मीर जब आया तो एक हफ़्ता मैंने अपना कोई काम नहीं किया। मैं पुलवामा घूमा, कुलगाम घूमा, शुपियान घूमा और श्रीनगर के कुछ कुछ एड्रेसेस थे और वहाँ मैं गया और वो सारी चीज़ें डिलीवर की, वो सारी मैसेज डिलीवर की। और अभी भी मुझे याद है कि जब एक बाप जो था वो एक लेटर पढ़ रहा था अपनी बेटी की, वो दिल्ली में मुझे मिली थी, तो उसने जो वो लेटर सारी पढ़ी, लेटर ख़त्म की पढ़ के, तो उसने रोया, बहुत रोया उसने मुझे अपने गले लगाया, कहा कि जैसे मेरा बेटा मेरे पास आए।
One mistake that can be made here is that these films can solely be looked at as protest films, a product solely of what is happening around us. But this collection of works is showing us that there is something much deeper at a material level of cinema's relation with the self. When the sense of self is forced to compress both out and in, past and present. This moment of collapse can be seen in Mohammad Fahmi's Ruposh, who was born and brought up on the Jamia campus. When he realizes that connecting to his family in Pakistan could have really bad consequences for him personally due to him being a Muslim man from Jamia, we see him break in this stuckness. This moment captured on film is a presentation of a deep vulnerability, with no attempts to gain sympathy. It is a sustained scream to openly assert the wounds that are being caused by the current regime. It's open for us to fix, not to glare at. What we're looking at here is a piece that tries to connect its parents' history of partition with the current reality. It is a work reflecting back on itself.
अब ये हो रहा है कि भेजना चाहिए या नहीं। पहली चीज़ कि अम्मी को कैसा लगेगा जब पता चलेगा कि भाई कर रहा है। दूसरी चीज़ वहाँ पे पहुँच गया और जवाब नहीं आया, चलो बात ख़त्म। अभी जैसे वैसे जवाब आ गया, फिर आप क्या करोगे? ठीक है, फिर फ़ोन पे बात होगी, ये होगी, पुराने सारे लोग मिलेंगे, वो रिश्ता जो टूट गया वो है। तो फिर ये भी तो लगता है ना कि मैं जिस जगह पे रहता हूँ, मैं शाहीन बाग में रहता हूँ, मैं पढ़ता जामिया में हूँ, ठीक है। यहाँ पे हम कई चीज़ें ऐसी देख चुके हैं। अभी भी L18 देख रखा है हमने, पिछला 15 दिसंबर देखा है, 1 साल हुआ आज, ठीक है। तो उसके बाद लगता है कि यार वो चीज़ होती है कि फिर कनेक्शन अगर हो गया तो कहीं आपके साथ तो ऐसा कुछ हो नहीं सकता। नहीं, पिछले साल किसने सोचा था कि लाइब्रेरी में घुस के पुलिस मारेगी हमें? पुलिस वाले क्या कह रहे थे, तुम पाकिस्तानी हो। अब मैं वहाँ पे अपने मामा को खुद भेजूं, कैसे भेजूंगा? मतलब तू खुद सोच कि मतलब इंसान को क्या लगेगा।
A work that reflects back on itself offers itself infinitely as nothing else but work and void. Its gaze is at once an impulse that causes the work to fall apart, to return to the initial no-worthness, and an ultimate gift to its constitution. A gift by which the work is freed from the tyranny of meaning as well as from the omnipresence of the subject of meaning. To let go of the hold at the very moment when it is at the most effective is to allow the work to live and to live on independently of the intended links, communicating itself in itself. Like Benjamin's, the self is a text, no more and no less a project to be built. Documentary is not a name, it's a team in heart. The process of truth seeking and experiencing is not limited to the documentary form as one would assume, considering its close ties with objectivity. While documentaries abandon the tent pole of the objective, Some fiction films allow real life to enter itself. The meaning of these works, just like the others being discussed here, exist in between the story and the storyteller, constantly mutating and evolving to incorporate itself within it. In Kayo Kayo Color, when the camera shifts away to make way for a car passing, or lets the actors look into the sensor, or lets itself be toyed by a child, the filmmaker is asserting themselves as a presence, not an objective observer, but one that is sure of why it is where it is. The moments of unsurety are worn as badges of honor, thereby certifying the authenticity of the intent the piece has. Shah Rukh wants to tell a story of a family that he himself is related to through the producer of the film. Every character is from Radcon Ahmedabad, and every story is a recreation of atrocities fed by them directly. The making of the film itself begins the act of meaning making. Can They Hear Our Songs takes things a step further, excavating a family's lost truth and bringing it to the forefront. The form sings, soars above the oppressor, represented in the form of an army jawan, as the ground shakes in rage from the songs of Mary's community. The turning of a song lamenting drought into a powerful cry of assertion is precisely what binds the web of these works together. As it weaponizes personal grief as a point of entry and assertion, it builds upon itself like a self-healing cell, replicating and duplicating its DNA, shared in between the spine of all makers here.
ধৌ দেখি কান্দে মোর প্ৰাণে কিয় সাহেব পাৰলৈ চপাই দিয়া না ধৌ দেখি কান্দে মোর প্ৰাণে কিয় সাহেব পাৰলৈ চপাই দিয়া না আসমানতে ৰুলো ধান তাকো মাৰে বানে আল্লাহ তাকো মাৰে বানে সমুদ্ৰতে ৰুলো পান ৰ'দত জ্বলি মৰে আল্লাহ ৰ'দত জ্বলি মৰে পুখুরিতে পানি নাই পার ডুবি পরে আল্লাহ পার ডুবি পরে গসর দালত পক্ষী নাই যাকে যাকে পুরে কি ওই সাহেব পারো দইস পাই দিয়ানা ধো দেখি কান্দে মুর প্রাণে কি ওই সাহেব পারো দইস পাই দিয়ানা।
What's interesting about this select body of works is that even when it's not putting the maker in the center, the mere absence of the maker becomes the point. In Camille Saif's The Last Rehearsal, it starts its satire at the heart of a propaganda set. Camille masterfully shows an ideologue where not a single Muslim exists and constructs an alternate reality of the so-called Islamo-jihadist agenda. The only denotion of Camille's presence is his mocking and playful camera work, silently haunting the recesses of a repressed psyche who looks at every Muslim, especially the ones who fall in love, as manipulators.
हम दोनों के एक होने के लिए तुम्हें मुसलमान बनना होगा, तुम्हें इस्लाम कबूल करना होगा।
शोएब, मैं पहले ही अपना सब कुछ तुम पे निछावर कर चुकी हूँ। अब तुम्हें देने के लिए मेरे पास अब कुछ नहीं है सिवाय मेरे धर्म के।
देखो अंकिता, मैं ये सब नहीं जानता, बस यही एक रास्ता है, वरना तुम अपना देख लो।
वरना क्या देख लो? तुम्हें पता है अब मैं मजबूर हूँ और तुम मेरी मजबूरी का फायदा उठाना चाहते हो। तो मेरे पास सब रास्ता ही क्या बचा है?
हाँ तो शोएब, तो ठीक है, पढ़िए कलमा। ला इलाहा
ला इलाहा
इल्लल्लाह इल्लल्लाह। हाँ ठीक।
सॉरी सर, मुझसे नहीं होगा।
व्हाट? कट कट। क्या चल रहा है ऋतु ये? अरे आज लास्ट रिहर्सल है और तुमने अभी तक अपने डायलॉग्स याद नहीं किए। और आलोक जी, आप?
जी सर।
यार अब आप मौलवी के किरदार में हो।
हाँ तो सर 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 माफ कीजिएगा, वो पिछले सीन में पंडित बने थे और ये तिलक हटाना।
ठीक है ठीक है। मेकअप
मेकअप
मैंने पहले ही कहा था, इससे डायलॉग याद नहीं हो रहे हैं।
चुप।
सर डायलॉग तो याद है पर मैं बोलूंगी नहीं।
क्यों भाई, क्या हो गया?
सर ये डायलॉग बोला तो मुसलमान बन जाऊंगी और मैं मुसलमान नहीं बनना चाहती।
क्या बकवास कर रही हो तुम?
नहीं सर, ये डायलॉग नहीं कलमा है और इसे विश्वास से बोलते हैं तो मुसलमान बन जाते हैं।
अरे तो बेटा विश्वास के ही बोलते ना।
The art industry in India is marked by a distinct tendency to consolidate, a continuous process that is designed ultimately towards the cultivation of a center. It is from this side that of the intangible middle that notions of taste, value, trend, discourse, meaning, and the contemporary emerge. In short, the center is the factory where definitions are manufactured. In an era where the power to construct an imagination of the nation is held almost exclusively within hands that belong to the extreme, it is perhaps even more essential that contemporary collectives recede even further into the local to ensure that pluralities endure and that the nation is a fermentation that is a yield of various nutrients instead of a single most strident one. The Betrayed Map of the Nation, Anuj Malhotra. To knit this thread is an attempt to collectivize. It is a very selfish attempt for me to mend whatever has been breaking inside me over the past decade. Shilpi Gulati elaborates in her article, Why Can't a Film Made with Indian Funding Compete at Cannes? the absolute lack of funding within India, forcing one to look at the West for a meaningful budget to work on films. She makes a point for filmmakers, programmers, academics and researchers to work together to create an environment in the country for our own distribution channels that aren't reliant on the colonial gaze to exist. To add further to this, as Muslim media practitioners in India, we very well know that the avenues for production and funding are open, but only for a certain kind of gaze, even within India. The Muslim lived experience only ends up being a surface on which dominant and articulate ideas can float on, be it from dominant castes within India or the white man's gaze, and is often not able to get into the tapestry of contradictions that exist within the minority community. Moreover, many contemporary funding institutions have also clearly been siding with the oppressor, as seen with the protest to free Palestine and the reactions to it by world-renowned filmmaking festivals and grant institutions. This reduces our confidence further in many possible avenues in saying what we want to with our work. Where does the Indian Muslim look towards to find space and budgets to tell their stories in the way they want to tell it? The only way forward is to create our own spaces, where the conversation is not dictated by sorry faces and apologetical sympathy, but rather a real space of knowledge seeking and creating towards Haqqul Yaqeen. By coming together, even finding common threads of form and practice, I am attempting here to show that the reverberations shaking the landscape are not isolated towards a singular auteur, but rather a set of feedback loops, making and unmaking themselves as they reach closer to a making of our own truth. Now, if this process of reaching is closer to God or some unique truth never before seen in the Indian cinematic landscape, is not for me to decide. Thank you.